Welcome back to McNulty's Book Corral. Today is the third lecture relating to the classic era of Golden Age pulp fiction. Thank you for attending these classes. I sincerely appreciate it. Before we get going, I want to mention that I'm raising my glass in a toast to all the magnificent writers from that era who recalibrated the universe and made it go from sideways to something different. Kind of amazing. Just kidding, guys. Hobgoblin Red Ale is today's medicinal beverage. So allow me to take a sip and recalibrate myself. Oh yeah. Just a touch of that and the universe starts to balance itself, as you're going to see. Okay, so third episode relating to the box. Alright, so the last stack of pulp magazines come out. And that's this stack here. And they are astounding science fiction. So we're going to go into this and we're going to have a little fun. So the first thing I pulled out of here were the 3 issues featuring Death World by Harry Harrison. It was serialized in 3 issues. And look at the great cover artwork on this one. I really love it. And then the second installment was here. So this installment, the first one, was January of 1960. And then, of course, we have February of 1960. And then we had March of 1960, which has a fantastic cover as well. Really a fun story. And Harry Harrison would have great success with the Death World. They would be, it became a series for him, along with the Stainless Steel Rat and Bill the Galactic Hero and many, many others. So Astounding in the late 50s, and so forth, or through the 50s, is publishing some really good stuff, but we're seeing a transition happen here. We're seeing the transition from bug-eyed space aliens and ray guns to the literature of ideas. And I'm going to explain that a little more in depth in a minute. So what we're seeing a transformation happen in the genre, which is not unusual. So we have the type of writers that I have in this stack alone, the type of writers that are represented in here. And the writers, I'll give you their names. We have Frank Herbert is in here. We have Robert Silverberg. Many Silverberg stories in here. Silverberg has always been prolific. The great Robert Silverberg. Paul Anderson, Murray Leinster, Randall Garrett, Mac Reynolds. Okay, all just buddies. I met him years and years ago in Chicago. Gordon R. Dixon and Jack Vance, the great Jack Vance. These are all the names of the writers who appear in the pulp magazines in this era. But what we're starting to see is a transformation of the stories just slightly changing. There's a tilt here. There's a cultural change which would continue into the 1960s with obviously the Cultural Revolution, which involved every creative art out there. Literature, music. Obviously, the music was a major influence in the 60s, and film and so forth. So Astounding is getting away from the exploitative aliens, flying saucer type stories, and that's reflected also in the cover artwork. They're less exploitive. So you still have old-fashioned adventure tales. Here we have a Murray Leinster story. We still have that going on. But then they're changing, and you're looking at some of the artwork. Here's a March of 59 issue. And it's really something. You take a look at this cover, and it's like, why would I read this? Missing are the girls. The girls were... The female form was a big part of pulp fiction for decades, especially during the Golden Age. But again, we see a shift, during the Cold War. Everything is changing. We're getting a little more realism in things. And so this is reflected in the artwork. They still occasionally would do something, a little bold and exploitive like this. There's an alien, obviously something's going on. But they were very quickly moving away from this. This is 59. So in 59, we see a big change. Astounding science fiction is about to change to analog. which is what it's still called. We do have, now the cover artwork during this period is by a variety of artists. This one is a little more in tune with the classic era of pulp fiction, but we're moving past that pretty clearly now. And with these writers that I mentioned, you're going to start to see really a major shift. Here's a fun cover that I think reflects that shift. There's a little humor here, and that wasn't the normal thing for pulp fiction. They're playing with these ideas, and you're seeing that happen as well. And then we have, here's a cerebral cover. I don't get this cover at all, and the stories inside this issue weren't all that particularly spectacular. But look at this. We really have nothing here. I talked about the hook in previous issues. The cover can be the hook, just as the first paragraph, the first lines can be a hook in a story. The cover is a hook too, but where's the hook here? It's really cerebral. We have a intelligent-looking male. It's a male-dominant genre. It was at the time. It's not now. And a rocket ship blasting off. But what does that mean? I mean, it's not the type of cover you're going to think, oh, I need to read that. There's a change here. They're pushing toward, I think, intentionally a different audience. Here's another one, almost identical type of thing. You have these cerebral-looking males coming along, and a futuristic spaceship down here, which means what? Are you interested? Would you buy that compared to the ones I previously showed you? Here is yet another one. Now, this is a Gordon R. Dixon story. They're playing with genre here, but I don't think the covers are successful. Here's one that's a little more traditional. You're getting a hardcore science fiction cover with the spacecraft and so forth. And then this is one of the more interesting ones here. I think it's a really poorly designed cover, and yet I understand the cover. So let me explain. Take a look at this one from June of '59, okay? So when you look closely at this cover, this could be from Sports Illustrated, or Field and Stream or something like that, because all you have here is you have a guy wearing the plaid, he's carrying a bucket, he's scratching his head, and he's looking out into the forest. So you really have to look closely at the cover. This cover coincides with the story Cat and Mouse by Ralph Williams. And this is a story where he encounters a portal to another world. And that's this section here where the landscape is changed in the middle. But the artwork is not that well done where it's bold and jumping out at you. None of these covers are doing that. We don't have anything here that's really jumping out at you. The stories are good for the most part. They're very good. We're talking about the writers that I just gave you. I mean, how can you argue with Frank Herbert and Jack Vance? So what we're getting into here with this type of thing is we're getting into cultural anthropology. We're getting into ethnic issues and sexual ideas. We're getting into analogies for the 1950s, the culture of the 50s reflected in futuristic stories, and that sweep, that move, that transition to more relevant type of fiction is very prominent in Astounding at this period. And it remains that way today, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So we also see in some of these stories the inclusion of Greek mythology, Nordic symbols. These writers were highly intelligent and prolific scholars in their own way. And so they're doing a lot of this type of thing and pushing it forward, to make it something that's a little more relevant. I don't know what the sales figures were for this, but, from what I read, you look this stuff up on the internet, the magazine sold. I mean, it's still in business today, but it did transform to analog. And it's interesting to see that transition really quickly in the 1950s. Mid-50s on, everything moves in a different direction. So we have less issues with, like if this type of cover was done in 1947, for example, there would have been a girl on the cover, and she would have been in danger, perhaps a bondage cover image or whatever. But they've quickly moved away from that. So, that was John W. Campbell, who was the editor, who also wrote essays in here now and again. Isaac Asimov would contribute to this magazine with nonfiction essays on scientific matters as well. So you can see the shift happening here, which brings us to today. I mentioned in a previous episode that I'm not a big fan of the modern pulps. There's only 3 or 4 of them out there, really. And it's because I felt that they were writing over your head. They're looking for academic audiences. They're trying to become mainstream literature. They always were. Genre fiction has always been mainstream literature. It just wasn't viewed that way by the critics. You got to stop listening to critics. Forget them. It's mainstream. Genre fiction is the heart of literature. Westerns, romance, science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, etc. Mysteries. But they're making a conscious effort to move into that. And I haven't looked at any of Analog in a couple of years, so someone emailed me, a friend of mine emailed me after hearing my comment in that episode, and he said, you ought to look at their website. They have excerpts from some current stories for Analog, and it'll give you an idea on where they're going. I did look at that, and I thought the excerpts were okay. I was interested in finding out where they were going with what I read. There weren't many. That doesn't mean I'm going to subscribe to Analog anytime soon, nor would I subscribe to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. But I've decided that I'm going to look at them again and maybe reevaluate my stance a little bit. Everything changes. Everything goes in a cycle. So we'll see where it goes with this type of thing, from Astounding to Analog in modern times, and see if we can tilt the universe back into place, because it's dislodged right now. Is it not? Let's take a sip and find out. Yeah, Hobgoblin Red Ale says, we're going to be fine. All right, so listen. Thank you for participating in this 3-episode lecture series. That's it for March. We will return in April. There will be an examination. There will be 100 multiple choice questions, and there will be 3 essays. 1 essay for each of the 3 episodes involving the box of pulps that I just showed you. And those essays should be 1,500 words each. So be sure to get to that. You can start that now. If you want, just put your ideas down on paper. I'm just kidding, guys. Until April, stay well, stay happy, feed your brain, drink a pint, read a book, and cheers.